Today we're going to tie a classic Adirondack fly pattern that is very good for salmon, lake trout, and basically anything that eats smelt. When I was younger, there was a fly shop up in Northville. It was Ed's Fly Shop. It was owned and operated by Ed Bendel. Ed was a great guy, and he's one of the Adirondack fly tyers that I profiled in my recent book. And his shop was a fixture, and I used to stop there all the time. The one thing that Ed was known for are tandem streamers. And you go in the shop and they'd all be in little packets like this with the names on them, and he signed each card, and it was really neat. And he had like framed displays of a lot of his tandem streamer patterns that he created. He did a lot of fishing in the lakes and the southern Adirondacks for brown trout and landlocked salmon, so he used a lot of these patterns. And so the one we're going to tie today is called the Margo Smelt. It's great for anything that eats smelt, and it's a favorite of mine, and I use it for lake trout in the spring when the lakers are up shallow and the smelt are running into their feeder streams coming into the lake. Here's how to tie the Margo Smelt. So this is the trailer hook. We'll start the thread and run it down the trailer hook. Snip that off. Now this fly uses a bit of goose feather for a tail, so we're going to put a tail on using the pinch method. Couple of wraps on that, and we're going to use braided tinsel, so we'll get that on right over the feather wraps, and leave the tag ends of the feather and the tinsel long, so they're going to be just behind where we're going to build the eye up. And I'm going to go back down that and back up it to make it nice and smooth. Okay, bringing forward the braided tinsel. Make nice tight wraps. And we'll tie that off. And trim it. Now Ed's flies, he always joined the two hooks together with monofilament. So this is going to be the rear hook. So we're going to go loop that underneath and bring that through the eye. And pull that tight. So now we just got to build the head up. And you kind of have to contend with the monofilament, but it's not that hard. And we'll do a whip finish. Trim it off, glue it down, and that's it for the rear fly. We'll start the thread down the front fly. And the rear fly is going to ride hook point up about like that behind the front fly. Just get that started, and we want the monofilament to run right down the back of the front fly. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to stick these two ends of the mono down through. I need about that much of it, so I'm going to trim it. Now the reason that these tandem flies came into being is that the anglers found that the landlocked salmon and the lake trout that they would fish for in the spring would strike short a lot. They'll bite at the end of the fly, which they do in real life. They bite the end of the minnows and then they go back and they eat all the cripples. So they ended up putting on a second hook on the fly, and you'll see that in a lot of these tandem patterns. These were eds that he developed for the Adirondacks, but there's a lot of tandem patterns all throughout New England. So we want to pinch that down in the front and get that nice and tight. And you would think this is kind of fragile, but I've never caught a lake trout on the, never had this pull apart. So I've caught several lakers on this rig on the tail fly, and it always stays together. Okay, that's looking good. So we got to do our tinsel. And we'll go back down it. And back up it. Get it down nice and tight. And we'll bring that forward. Make a nice tight body. And trim that. So Ed used a little bit of red bucktail as a beard in the front of the fly, so we're going to tie some of that in. Not a lot, but just enough to make a little beard in the front of the fly. And he used just a wisp of white bucktail. Get that back through so that our length is going back into the trailing hook. that down tight. Trim everything off. Next comes yellow. Then we got cerise, a purpley color. Okay, last thing, peacock herl. Ed used silver pheasant for cheeks. I'm going to cheat a little bit and use a teal flank feather, which is pretty close. And we're going to put one of those on each side. Everything trimmed off. And we'll bind everything down, make the head of the fly. Now Ed had another thing that he did on a lot of his flies. Ed used jungle cockeyes, which back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, that was very popular for putting an eye, especially on like Atlantic salmon flies. But jungle cock is expensive, and the reason he had so much of it, you can read about in my book. He had a lifetime supply of jungle cock like nobody else would ever have. But he would use a jungle cockeye like that. Fly doesn't really need it and works just as well without it. You could also use just a modern stick-on eye. Just put that on the cheek. And I'm just going to whip finish. Add the head cement, nice thick layer of head cement, and it's done. And there it is, Margo Smelt.